Hey Cheve, what's up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Beis, Gimel, Dalid, I think. Let's say that for now. Of Masechta Sukkah. Cheve, Daf Dalid of Masechta Sukkah. Oh my gosh, a funny little daf. It's totally Erevin, Cheve. Totally Erevin Sukkahs. We have, what are like the three halacha l'Moshe Missinais when it comes to Mechitza? Cheve, no, quick. Who could tell me? Good, lavud, dofen akuma. All of these inyanim come up on the Avdal of Masechta Sukkah. What else? Hillel, Reb Hillel. Pase Beros. I remember you had a kasha on Pase Beros in Masechta Erevin. The Diyumdin. Remember the Diyumdin? Those like L-shaped kind of things that shame Dalid Mechitzis. Oh my goodness gracious. So Chevre, these exciting sugyas come up today on Daf Dalid of Masechta Sukkah. So let us get started. We're going to start, where do we start? Chevre, where do we start? And Daf Gimel, I think? Yeah, there. Daf Gimel would base 2 lines from the bottom of the Maaseh. Aha. So you have Epis of Sukkah, and it's taller than 20 amas. So of course it's a problem. Okay? And now so you figure, okay, I have an idea. I'll take some pillows and cushions and blankets and all these things. I'll throw them on the floor, fill up raise the floor a shtickle, and now it'll be from the space between the pillows and things, and the schach will be now less than 20 amas. Zeu, kosher sukkah, right? Lo avimiyut. No, it doesn't work. How come? Even if you say, look, I'm not going to touch these pillows and cushions, I'm going to leave them there the Gantz Yontif. I'm going to leave them there for the whole Sukkos. I'm not touching them. And therefore it's mamish, it's okay. I'm putting them there, I'm going to leave them there, I'm not going to take them away. There's the space between the pillows and the schach is now less than 20 amas. Shouldn't that be okay? The answer is no, it's not okay. Because even though you are being mevatel them, even though you're saying I'm not going to touch them, generally, however, pillows, cushions are things that you would not leave them there. You don't want them to get ruined, whatever it is. And therefore, most people would take these things away, and therefore we can't rely upon them to minimize the space of the sukkah. And even though you decide that you are going to leave them, you're the exception. And your intentions become irrelevant, since in general people would not do like that. So therefore, the fact that you, as an exception, would have the intention to leave them there, that is irrelevant in this context. So his intentions are batal, are null and void relative to the generally accepted practice. Tevnu vitlo have a miut. Now, if you took straw, right, straw that you could feed to animals, that you can use for burning in fires, that you can use for making bricks and things. If you take straw and you say, I'm going to fill up the space and lower it to be within, make the space with it less than 20 amas. If you do that with straw, if you're mevatel it, if you take this straw and you're saying, I'm going to use this straw to minimize the height of my sukkah, and that's it, it's batal, I'm not using it for anything else. Have a miut. That's acceptable. The chol shekain offer of it though. And certainly, of course, if you take dirt and you fill up the space with dirt to make it less than 20 amas, and you mevatel it, and you said, I'm leaving this dirt here the entire sukkahs, that's also fine. However, tevin ve'nosin lefanoso, what if you have straw that you didn't explicitly be mevatel it, you didn't explicitly say that I'm not touching this straw the entire yontif, you didn't say that. But you also have no plans of using it, you have plenty of straw for your animals, you're not building anything, so you don't need it for bricks, you have plenty of firewood, whatever it is, you're putting the straw there. You didn't explicitly say that you're leaving it there, but at the same time, you don't have any immediate use for it. V'afar stam, or what if you put dirt there, and again, you don't say explicitly that you're leaving it there, but also, it's dirt. Like, what are you going to do with it? So machlokas. Rabbi Yossi Rabbanan. So this is Taka machlokas Rabbi Yossi and the rabbis. The Tanan is we learn in the Mishnah. Where's this Mishnah? Who could tell me? Olos. Bayishmaleu teven otzroris uvidlo mivoto. If you have a house that you filled up with straw or with like gravel, rocks, things like that, uvitlo, and then you mevatel it, mivoto. No, what's that talking about, Chavra? What's it talking about? It's talking about this. Okay. So let's say you have a corpse, and the corpse is in a house, lying on the floor. And let's say you have a Kohen on the roof of the house. So the question is, does the tumah from the corpse go straight up through the roof, and is it going to be is it going to be metame, the Kohen who's on top of this corpse on the roof? So the answer is, if there's a tefach of space, I feel like this has come up before, although not too often, I don't think. If there's a tefach of air, if there's a tefach of space above the corpse, between the corpse and the roof, so then that will sort of stop the tumah from penetrating through the roof and being metame our Kohen friend. However, if the entire house is filled up with dirt, is entirely filled up, there's no air, there's no space, well then the tumah of the corpse goes straight up through the roof, and if the Kohen is above the corpse, he's going to be making an oil over the corpse, and he's going to be tameh. That is what's called tumah ritzutza, right? That the tumah just kind of goes straight through. So, okay. And that's why, that's why I think there's a shaila if you kind of fly over a cemetery in a plane, if the tumah goes all the way up to the heavens, akoponim. So that's why I think in Eretz Yisrael, I think they try to make like some space between like the corpse and they said it's not tumah ritzutza. Akoponim, I don't know really, but anyways, so the shaila over here is that you have a house and you fill it up with dirt. And now the whole house is filled up with dirt, and you have a corpse in there, and you have a Kohen on the roof. And the shaila is the tumah of the corpse going to go straight up and metame the Kohen on the roof? So we say it depends. So you filled it up with dirt. So pashtus is, well, if there's no space, it's filled up with dirt. So yes, the tumah goes straight through. But what if this is dirt that you're going to be removing? Because you're going to, right? So let's say it's straw, for example, and you're going to need it to feed the animals, so you're going to be taking it away. So then maybe it's not really considered like it's there. Maybe it's, we consider you're going to take it away and it creates space. So now, with that context, let's go back in and read this. So, Ba'ishim Leu Tevin. So let's say you have a house, and the house has a corpse in it, and you have a Kohen on the roof. And we want to know, is the tumah of the corpse going to go straight through the roof and be metame the Kohen? So if you fill up the house with straw, otzoris, or with like gravel, essentially dirt, uvitlo, and you mevatel it. You say, I'm never going to touch this straw. I'm never going to touch this dirt. Mevuto. Well, then it's bottle. And therefore, there's no space in the house. And the tumah of the corpse is going to go straight through the roof and be metame the kohen. Bitlo in lo, bitlo lo. So we want to be medayik that in order for it to be considered like the dirt is there and the straw is there, you have to dafka be mevatel it. You have to say, I'm not touching this dirt, I'm leaving it. You have to specifically say, I'm leaving it there. But if, shy of that, if you didn't say, I'm leaving it there, well then it's not bottle, and you might take it and remove it later, and in which case there's considered to be space in the house, and the tumah would not go through the roof. Vitani Allah, and we teach about it. Rabbi Yossi, Omer says, Rabbi Yossi, Tevin vein also lefanoso, if you have straw and you have no intention of removing it, it's like regular dirt and it's bottle. So we see that according to Rabbi Yossi, straw that you have no intention of removing and dirt, stam, you don't specifically say that you're leaving it there forever, but it's dirt. In both of those cases, you can assume that you're leaving it there, and it's bottle. Offer v'asin lefanoso, if you have dirt that you are planning on removing, v'lareu kistam teven v'lo batul. Then it's like just regular straw, and it's not batul. Okay. And therefore we want to say that the same rules would apply to a sukkah. That if you have straw or you have dirt and you explicitly say that you're going to leave it there, so then it could make the space in the sukkah smaller. If you have straw and you have dirt and you're specifically going to remove it, you're specifically going to be using it at some point, well then it's not going to make the space smaller. If you have straw but you have no intention of using it for anything else, or if you have dirt, stam, well in both of those, so that's going to be machlokas between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi about whether that would be able to be usable to make the space in the sukkah smaller. Okay, sounds nice to me. Fine. If the sukkah was taller than 20 amas, v'hutzin yardim b'sochaf ama, and there's like branches and things that are hanging down into 20 amas, right? So you have a sukkah that's taller than 20 amas, and so they have the schach at the top. But let's say the schach is palm branches, different kinds of things, and it's hanging down into the space. So im tzilasam ruba mechamasam kshera v'im lav psula. So if the branches and things that are hanging down into the space of the sukkah, if there's enough of this stuff hanging down that it's actually taking up most of the space, meaning it would be more shade than sun, right? That there's lots and lots of these branches hanging in, that they in their own right would be schach, just the parts that are hanging into the space. Well then, as long as they're hanging in within 20 amas, well then we could view it as if there's kosher schach within 20 amas. But if it's only a little bit of the schach, and therefore, really most of the within 20 amas area is space, and there's no branches there, so then it would be more sun than shade within 20 amas, in which case that would not work. What if it's the opposite? What if it's not the maximum height of a sukkah, rather the minimum height of a sukkah? So let's say it's 10 tefachim tall, which in and of itself would be the minimum acceptable height. Vehutzin yardin lesoch yud, but you have some branches and stuff hanging down into the 10 tefachim. So Abai figured to say, im chamasam ruba mitzilasam kshera. Well, as long as it's only a little bit of the schach hanging down into the 10 tefachim, but most of it is not hanging down into it, and therefore it's mostly more sun than shade. So then the parts that's hanging into 10 tefachim is basically batul. It's not relevant, and you have a sukkah that is 10 tefachim tall, and therefore kshera. Amalei Rava responds to Abai, hadira sruchi v'in adam dar b'dira srucha. Rava says, meh. A sukkah that's 10 tefachim tall, 10 tefachim is very, very low, and you have these branches hanging down into the 10 tefachim, that's a very unpleasant and uncomfortable sukkah, and people don't live in uncomfortable spaces, and therefore, even if technically speaking, the amount of these branches that are coming down into this 10 tefachim space is not that much, but it's enough to make it uncomfortable and annoying to be in that space, and therefore, says Rava, that's not a space that somebody would want to dwell in for a week. If you have a sukkah that's taller than 20 amas, fine. Oh my gosh, this is like mamish erevin. Erevin in the sense that all of these structures that we have to sort of explain these structures and what they are. And this hechsher sukkah, it's kosher. So what does this mean? So this means you have a sukkah and it's too tall. It's 20 amas tall. And what you do is you build a platform. So now if you build a platform, then we'll judge the space between the top of the platform and the schach. And now that space is less than 20 amas. Givaldik. Now where is this platform? So imagine you walk into your sukkah and you go straight to the back wall, and you build the platform there on the back wall, and it goes mamish the whole width of the back wall. So it's mamish touching, two of the side walls also. So let's say, we call the wall, let's say straight ahead of you, the back wall, the north wall, and you build this platform along the north wall, and it touches the western wall and it touches the eastern wall as well, which means that this platform essentially has 3 walls, right? The back wall and the 2 side walls are the walls of this platform. And between the top of the platform and the schach is less than 20 amas. And as long as this platform is more than the minimum size of a sukkah, which we discussed yesterday, which is Rosh of Rubo v'Shulchano, which is 7 tefachim by 7 tefachim. So as long as this platform is 7 tefachim by 7 tefachim wide, so givaldik, the platform itself is a kosher sukkah, right? From the top of the platform to the schach is less than 20 amas. It's got 3 walls, which we learned on the first day is the minimum number of walls for a sukkah. Givaldig. And the chiddush is that since that platform is in its own right a kosher sukkah, the entire sukkah is now kosher. Even the parts that are not on the platform, right? You have a big sukkah, and it's more than 20 amas tall, which is a pasul sukkah. But you have this platform along the far wall, this strip that's 7 tefachim wide, and it goes along the whole back wall from one side to the other, and that platform is technically a kosher sukkah. Well, now the entire sukkah is a kosher sukkah, because as Rashi explains, we're going to see later on that there's something called psal hayotzei min sukkah. Let's say you have a sukkah, a regular sukkah, a kosher sukkah, and there's some of the schach is like hanging off the outside, the outside of it. You could theoretically sit under the schach that's hanging over the outside of it, even though the outside there's no walls or anything like that, it's outside the sukkah, but you could sit under the overhanging schach, and that would be considered a kosher sukkah, from the stuff that's hanging out of the sukkah. And therefore, we'll view the entire sukkah outside of the platform in the same way, that it's like schach that's kind of hanging over the sukkah, right? Meaning we're viewing the sukkah as the platform which is 7 tefachim by 7 tefachim wide and goes from wall to wall, and it has 3 walls. So that's the sukkah. And then the rest of the sukkah, that's taller than 20 amas, is just considered like the overhang from this platform, and therefore it's kosher to be there as well. Wow. Like mamish, like Eruvin kind of levels of detail over here. Now, umin atzad, what if this platform isn't along the entire northern wall? Let's say it's along the entire eastern wall. Let's say it's along the entire eastern wall and then hits the northern wall, but not the entire width of the northern wall. Let's say only 50% of the northern wall. So in this case, you have this platform. It's 7 tefachim by 7 tefachim, sure. But it really only has 2 walls now. It's got the eastern wall and it's got the northern wall, but the western wall is not touching it. Right? Let's say half of the sukkah is just space. So it's only got 2 walls now. So min atzad im yesh misvas itzteba la kosel dalet amos psula pachos me'aba amos kshera. Period. Chever, dofen akuma. Who remembers what dofen akuma is? I don't think did we really ever get too much into detail about dofen akuma? I'm not sure. But dofen akuma means a bent wall. A bent wall. And what this means is that, so in this case, you have a sukkah that's taller than 20 amas, which is a problem. So we have to minimize that height. So you build a platform in the sukkah, and this platform is along the entire eastern wall, and it touches the northern wall as well. So now you have 2 walls on this platform, the north wall and the east wall, but it's not touching the western wall. So what we're saying is, as long as the space between the platform and the western wall is less than 4 amas, so then what we'll do is, we'll treat the schach that's between the platform and the western wall as though the schach is actually part of the western wall. That the western wall, that of course goes from the ground up to the schach, and then you have the schach from the western wall until where the platform starts, that schach is actually considered part of the western wall, and that the western wall is just bent at a 90-degree angle, and then is going out until where the platform starts, and we can sort of draw the line of the wall, so to speak, from where the platform starts. And that all that schach from the western wall until where the platform begins is just considered a bent wall. It's part of the wall that's bent and touching where the platform begins. And that's where we draw down our line. And therefore, this platform is considered to be having three walls. It's got the eastern wall, it's got the northern wall, and its western wall, as long as from the edge of the platform to the western wall it's less than 4 tfachim, 4 amas, we can view it as though all the schach between the platform and the western wall is really just part of the western wall that's bent over and is reaching out towards the platform, and that's where we draw our line. And therefore this platform has 3 walls, and from the top of the platform to the schach is less than 20 amas, and therefore this platform is going to be a kosher sukkah. Now interestingly, however, in this case I believe that the rest of the sukkah would not be usable, because the rest of the sukkah is under, right, that schach for the rest of the sukkah is not kosher schach, it's wall. And you'll be sitting under a wall, which is not okay. But the platform itself would be acceptable. So again, uminat sad, so if this platform is on the side of the sukkah, let's say on the eastern wall, if from the side of the platform to the western wall is 4 amas, well then it's psula, because it's too much space. You can't say dofen akuma indefinitely. Only up to 4 amas can you say dofen akuma. Pachus mi-arba amas, but if there's less than 4 amas of space between the platform and the western wall, kshere, so then it's a kosher sukkah, because we'll say dofen akuma, and this platform at least is a kosher sukkah. What's the chiddush here? Dofen akuma, is that such a chiddush? Tanina, we already have a Mishnah that teaches us. On Daf Yud Zayin, that teaches us dofen akuma. If you have a house, and imagine a house with a flat roof, and the middle of the roof of the house caved in, and now you just have space. So you fill up that space with schach. So now what's going on over here? So you have schach filling up the space, but the schach isn't going all the way to the walls. You basically just have schach in a hole in the middle of the roof. So miesh min hakosa lasikuch dalet amos psula. So if between the walls and this space that you're filling in with schach is 4 amos, well then it's pasul. Hapachus mikan kshere. But if from the wall to the space that you're filling in with schach is less than 4 amas, well then it's a kosher sukkah, because we'll say dofen akuma. We'll say that the walls are bending to reach the middle area that has the schach, and therefore it's considered as though we draw the lines, so to speak, from the schach. We draw the lines down, and underneath the schach is a kosher sukkah, because the walls of the house would be considered the walls of the sukkah. Okay, so we already know from that Mishnah dofen akuma. So what's the chiddush over here with this platform that we say as long as there's less than 4 amas between the platform and the western wall, we'll say dofen akuma? Okay, what's the chiddush? Dofen akuma is a halacha, so we say dofen akuma, just like we say dofen akuma by the house that the roof caved in. We'll say dofen akuma over here. Why do we have to give like more examples than we need? Ma'udetema, I may have thought to say ahasamu dechazel ledofen. I may have thought to say that by the house that the ceiling caved in, there I'll say dofen akuma, because the walls of the house are kosher sukkah walls. They're less than 20 amas tall. But over here, when you have this western wall, which is more than 20 amas tall, which is too tall, it's not a kosher sukkah wall. So I might think that in this case, when you have a wall that's too tall as it is, and you're going to say dofen akuma in order to now make it an acceptable height, because then it'll be touching this platform. So I might think that when you have already a kosher wall, we could bend a kosher wall. But in this case, where the wall is not a kosher sukkah wall, we cannot bend it. Kamash malan, that you can even bend that, so that it will now be touching the platform, and now the platform is within 20 amas, and now it's a kosher wall, so we can even say dofen akuma in that way. What if you have a sukkah that is taller than 20 amas? Okay. And now you build a platform in the middle of the sukkah. Smack in the middle of the sukkah, not touching any walls. So you have a sukkah, it's taller than 20 amas, you take a platform and you stick it in the middle. So as long as from the, and now from the top of the platform to the schach, it's less than 20 amas. So as long as there's less than 4 amas between the walls and the platform, so then we could say dofen akuma. And we'll say that the walls reach out and bend to the platform. And we sort of draw the lines from the schach down to the sides of the platform. And from the top of the platform to the schach is less than 20 amas. So we'll say basically dofen akuma from all the walls, that they all bend to reach out to the platform. And that's going to be your sukkah on the platform. That's in the middle of the sukkah. So we'll say as long as from the platform to the walls is less than 4 amas, we'll say dofen akuma. Let's read that again. You have a sukkah that's taller than 20 amas, and you build a platform in the middle of the sukkah. If from the sides of the platform to the walls there is 4 amos or more, so l'choruach ruach in each side psula. Well, then that's a problem, because you can't say dofen akuma. Pachos me'arba amas ksher. But if from the sides of the platform to the walls there's less than 4 amas, well then it's ksher. Ma'ika mashma, what's the chiddush? Taminu dofen akuma, that we say dofen akuma. Ainu ach. We know that we say dofen akuma. Ma'odetema dofen akuma miruach achas aminon. Aval kol ruach v'ruach lo kamashmalon. I may have thought to say that we could say dofen akuma for one wall. For example, you have the platform on the eastern wall that goes, straight across to the northern wall, and I have to bend the western wall so that it'll be touching the platform. All right, we could say dofen akuma there. But to say that if you have a platform in the middle of the sukkah, you have to say dofen akuma for all 4 walls, maybe I'll say no. So kamash malan, that you can even say dofen akuma for all 4 walls. Givaldik. So now what if you have the opposite? What if you have a sukkah that is less than 10 tfachim tall? So it's too small. It's too short. So now what you do is, in the middle of the sukkah, you dig out some of the floor, so that now from the dugout area, from the bottom of the dugout area to the schach, is now 10 tfachim in that area. So that area that you've dug out has the minimum height of a sukkah. Im yesh misfas chekek v'lakosel gimel tfachim psula v'pachus mishlosha tfachim ksher. So here, we're no longer saying dofen akuma. Here we're saying lavud. So again, you have a sukkah that's too short. It's less than 10 tfachim. And then what you do is you dig out an area of the sukkah. Let's say in the middle of the sukkah, you dig out the floor, so that now from the bottom of the dugout area to the schach is 10 tfachim, which is the minimum height of a sukkah. So we say, if surrounding the dugout area, so if between the dugout area and the walls is 3 tfachim, then we can no longer say lavud. And since we can't say lavud, so then we cannot say that the dugout area expands all the way to the walls, and therefore we cannot consider it to have walls and to have a height of 10 tfachim. However, if outside, if between the dugout area and the walls are less than 3 tfachim, well then we'll say lavud. We'll say that basically the walls are connected to the dugout area, and the height of the sukkah is 10 tfachim. In fact, the Gemara, how come up until now we've been talking about Dofen Akuma, which gives you, up to 4 amis, and how come all of a sudden in this case we're saying Lavud, which only gives you up to 3 Tvachim? That's a really big difference. How come in the first case it qualified for Dofen Akuma, but over here it doesn't? And we can't consider the walls of this small sukkah to be bent over to where the dugout area is. Rather, we say that no, it has to be within 3 Tvachim of the wall, and then we could say Lavud. Why can't we say Dofen Akuma over here? And for the Gemara, Hasam, when it comes to the platforms, the Isei Ledofen, Pachos Me'arba Amos Sagir. Well, when it came to the platforms earlier, and the wall was more than 20 amis, and we're saying we have to bend it over and say Dofen Akuma, over there, Lemaisa, you had a wall. Maybe it was tall. Maybe it was a tall wall, but it was a wall. As long as it's more than 10 Tvachim tall, it's a proper wall. And therefore, you can now take this wall and you can bend it to say Dofen Akuma. Dofen Akuma, what does that literally means? A wall that you bend. So once it's more than 10 Tvachim tall, it's a wall. And we could then bend that wall and say Dofen Akuma. And the halacha is Dofen Akuma, which is halacha Moshe Misinai, is a yav up to 4 amas. However, over here in this small sukkah, in this short sukkah, that it's not even 10 Tvachim tall. Well, it's not even a wall bichlal. And if it's not a wall, then you can't say Dofen Akuma. In which case, all we could say is Lavud, which you can basically apply in any case, which is up to 3 Tvachim. And we say as long as the dugout area is within 3 Tvachim of the walls, we could say Lavud, that the dugout area is touching the walls and that the sukkah has a height of 10 Tvachim. But if it's more than 3 Tvachim between the dugout area and the walls, you cannot say Lavud, in which case the walls are not 10 Tvachim tall and you cannot use them. Okay. Gewaldig. So I'm reading that again. So when it comes to the earlier cases where we're talking about Dofen Akuma, that's where there already was a wall. It may have been a tall wall, but it was a wall and you could bend it. But over here, where it's less than 10 Tvachim tall, in which case it's not really considered a wall bichlal. It's not considered a wall bichlal. Excuse me. It's not considered a wall bichlal, so therefore you cannot apply Dofen Akuma and get the space of up to 4 amis. Rather, we have to work with Lavud, which is up to 3 Tvachim. And if it's within 3 Tvachim, we could say it's Lavud and it's 10 Tvachim tall. But if it's more than 3 Tvachim from the dugout area to the wall, we cannot say that, in which case the walls are less than 10 Tvachim and it's a Pasal Sukkah. Okay. If you have a Sukkah that's, of course, taller than 20 amas, okay, it's too tall. Uvana ba'amud shugavoa asar tvachim ve'esh ba'echsher sukkah. And then in the middle of the sukkah, you put a beam. In the middle of the sukkah, you put a beam. And this beam is 10 tvachim tall. And it's 7 tvachim by 7 tvachim wide. Which means that essentially the shaila is, do we say good asik? Right, so Rabbi Lemeimar could asik mechitzta le'rava b'ina mechitzos anikaros v'leka. What does this mean? It's like shtickle erevini, maybe even Shabbasi, right? Meaning, what's good asik? Who remembers what good asik is? Good asik means that we could view it as though a wall goes all the way up, and therefore, if you have this sukkah, and the sukkah is taller than 20 amas and it's really wide, it's a really big sukkah. And you take like a beam of sorts, a beam, a pole, and it's 10 Tvachim tall, which means that it's the minimum size of a wall, and the area on top of this beam is 7 Tvachim by 7 Tvachim or more, so it's got sort of the size of a sukkah. So Abaye wants to say that, let's say good asik, let's say that the sides of this beam, which are 10 Tvachim tall, so it's a proper wall, well, the wall just kind of continues going up. And therefore the space, if you're kind of standing on top of this beam, which is 7 Tvachim by 7 Tvachim, well, you're surrounded by the walls, these imaginary walls, that just kind of continue from the side of the beam and go all the way up to touch the schach. And you're now inside of a sukkah that has walls. And since the from the top of the beam to the schach is less than 20 amas, you're in a kosher sukkah. So Abai wanted to say, good asik mechitzta. Let's say that the sides of this beam, since they're 10 tefachim tall, they continue, imaginarily, in an invisible way, the sides of the beam continue all the way up, extend up to the schach. So you're surrounded by walls, and the minimum and the top, the surface of the beam is the minimum size of a sukkah, 7 tefachim by 7 tefachim. And there's less than 20 amas between the top of the beam and the schach. So Abai says Givaldik. Good asik, the walls go up, you have walls, Givaldik. Amulei Rava says to Abai, that's not quite enough. Rava says it's not enough to just have invisible walls surrounding you. You have to have some kind of visual indication that you're surrounded by walls. I guess the walls would have to extend somewhat, on the top of the beam in order for us to say good asik. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, no, it's aiba kundisin. If you take 4 beams, 4 kundisin pegs, pillars, you take poles, let's say, you take 4 poles, v'sikech al gaban, and you put schach on top of the 4 poles. Rabbi Yaakov machshir v'chachamim poslin. Rabbi Yaakov says givaldig. The chachamim say no, you can't just take 4 poles and put schach on top of it and that would be enough and call it a day. Chachamim say you cannot do that. Omer Rav Huna says Rav Huna machlokas al svas hagag. That this machlokas is davka on the sides of the roof. Rabbi Yaakov Sovar aminun good asik mechitzta, Rabbanan Savi lo aminun good asik mechitzta. Ava b'emtza hagag, Rabbi Yaakov psula. Chevra, what are we talking about? Rav Nachman says that we're talking about the roof, right? You have a house. The house is, let's say it's a 1-story house, and it's got a flat roof, and you're going to build your sukkah on the roof. So Rav Huna wants to say that the machlokas between Rav Yaakov and the Chacham is that, so you build your sukkah on the roof, and how do you build it? You take 4 poles, and you put 1 pole on each of the 4 corners of the roof. And therefore, we'll say, the question is, can you say good asik? Can you say that the 4 walls of the house will continue upwards, and therefore you have these 4 poles on each of the corners of the roof? And what's the walls of the sukkah? The walls of the sukkah are the walls of the house that will say good asik, that they continue up, and you have imaginary walls that continue up from the walls of the house. So again, Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, no, it's arba kundisin v'sikech al gaban. If you have 4 poles and you put schach on top of the 4 poles, Rabbi Yaakov machshav v'chacham poslin. Rabbi Yaakov says it's a kosher sukkah, the chacham say it's a pasul sukkah. Amar Rav Huna says Rav Huna machlokas al svas hagag, that the machlokas is on the sides of a roof. Right? Meaning you're building your sukkah, you're putting these poles on a roof, on the 4 corners of the roof. Rabbi Yaakov says aminun good asik mechitzta, that Rabbi Yaakov says, well, we'll take the 4 walls of the house and we'll imaginarily extend them upwards, and those are the 4 walls of your sukkah. And the rabbis say, no, we're not going to say good asik mechitzta, and therefore you don't have walls. Therefore it's a pasul sukkah. But if you were to take 4 poles and stick them in the middle of the roof, where there's no walls bichlal, even Rabbi Yaakov would say, okay, that's a pasul sukkah. Rav Nachman Omar, and Rav Nachman says, be'emtza agag machlokas. That no, the machlokas is taka in the middle of the roof. You take 4 poles, you put them in the middle of the roof, and you put schach on top. That's where Rabbi Yaakov says it's kosher, and the Chacham say it's pasul. Ibaylu, they want to know, be'emtza agag machlokas, aval asvas agag, divra kol kshera. When Rav Nachman says that the machlokas between Rabbi Yaakov and the Chacham is in the middle of the roof, does that mean, yes, the machlokas is in the middle of the roof, but if you would put the poles on the 4 corners of the roof, divra kol kshera, Rabbi Yaakov and the Chacham would agree that it's kosher because we'd say good asik? Or maybe Rabbi Yaakov and the Chacham would argue in both cases. They argue when the poles are in the middle of the roof, and they also argue when the poles are on the corners of the roof. Teku. We say we don't know. We don't know. Rabbi Nachman says that the machlokas is in the middle of the roof. We don't know if he's saying that on the side of the roof the machlokas would continue, or if everyone would agree that it's kosher. We don't know. Meisve. The Gemara now asks a kasha and Rav Huna. No, it's daled kundisin ba'aretz v'sikech al gabon. If you take 4 poles and you stick them into the ground, this time we're not talking about a roof. We're talking about you take 4 poles and you stick them into the ground and put schach on top. Rabbi Yaakov machsher v'chacham poslin. Rabbi Yaakov said it's a kosher sukkah. The chacham say it's a pasul sukkah. V'aretz decheemtza agag dami. Sticking 4 poles into the ground is the same as sticking 4 poles into the middle of the roof. V'kamachsher Rabbi Yaakov. And Rabbi Yaakov is saying, in this case, it's a kosher sukkah. If you take 4 poles and stick them into the ground and put schach on top, Rabbi Yaakov is saying it's a kosher sukkah, which is basically the same thing as taking 4 poles and stick them into the middle of the roof. Rabbi Yaakov would say there also it's a kosher sukkah, tiyufta de Rav Huna tiyufta, which is a kasha of Rav Huna, who says that the machlokas between Rabbi Yaakov and the Chachamim is dafka when you stick the poles into the corners of the roof, but in the middle of the roof, everyone would say that it's pasul, because there's no walls. But apparently, Rabbi Yaakov says, and we'll explain Rabbi Yaakov's opinion in a few minutes, apparently Rabbi Yaakov says that even if you take 4 poles and stick them into the ground or into the middle of the roof, apparently, it would still be kosher. So it's a kasha on Rav Huna, who says that everyone agrees that in the middle of the roof it would be pasul. V'od, and more so, the Gemara wants to say, I'll continue with our attack on Rav Huna and say that be'emtzahu de plige, that the implication of this brisa is that Rabbi Yaakov and the Chacham Davka would argue in the middle of the roof, which is the equivalent of sticking 4 poles into the ground. But on the corners of the roof, everyone would agree that it's a kosher sukkah. Which means that this would be a kasha in Rav Huna on 2 accounts. Kilu Rav Huna had said that in the middle of the roof, everyone agrees that it's pasul. Yet over here, we seem to be saying that Rabbi Yaakov would say it's taka kosher there. And Rav Huna said that the machlokas is dafka on the corners of the roof. Yet, the Gemara wants to say, I want to imply from the brisa that when it comes to the corner of the roof, everyone agrees that it would be kosher, which means that it's also against Rav Huna on that, because he says the corners of the roof is where the machlokas is. So where am I? So Amalach Rav Huna, so Rav Huna will respond to the second kasha and say, no. Pligi be'emtza agag v'adin al svas agag. No, I can argue that Rabbi Yaakov and the Chachamim argue in the middle of the roof. Fine, sure, I admit it. Okay, clearly they argue in the middle of the roof, just like they argue when you take 4 poles and stick them into the ground. But says Rav Huna, they also argue on the corners. The only reason why they argue specifically in the middle of the roof, is to teach a chiddush about Rabbi Yaakov, that he even says it's kosher in the middle of the roof. But the Chacham would still disagree and say that the corners, it does not work. So the machlokas is by both. Fine. Givaldik. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, no, it's arba kundisin ba'aretz v'sikech al gabon. Okay, so if you take 4 poles and you stick them into the ground and put schach on top, Rabbi Yaakov says, Ro'in kol she'ilu yechakiku v'yechalku v'yishboin tefach lechan v'tefach lechan nidonim mishum diyomed v'imlab in nidonim mishum diyomed. Rabbi Yaakov omer diyom de sukkah tefach v'chacham omer ad sheyihu shtayim kuchazon shlishas afilu tefach cheva. Remember the Pasei Beiros? I mentioned earlier that we're going to get into the Sugya Pasei Beiros shtickle. Remember that was a Gemara in Eruvin about when you have like a well in the middle of Rishus Harabim, and then you build like these 4 L's around it. So it's not full walls, but it's just, when it comes to Eruvin, it was an Amma in each direction. So you build Kilu, like almost like the outlines of a wall, right? You have these L's in all 4 corners with an Amma in each direction. So we say, Shem Daled Mechitzos, that already you have like the outlines of 4 walls over there. And therefore it's kosher, you can take water from the well into the area within these diomdin. So we want to say the same thing over here. When it comes to a sukkah, if you take 4 poles, and then you put schach on top of the 4 poles, as long as the poles are wide enough that you would be able to cut out L shapes with 1 tefach. When it comes to sukkah, it's a tefach, not an amma. With 1 tefach in each direction, and you could theoretically carve out diomdin, 4 diomdin. So says Rabbi Yaakov, that would be enough. You could put schach on top. And that's how to understand Rabbi Yaakov. That when Rabbi Yaakov says that if you take 4 poles and put schach on top of the 4 poles, it's a kosher sukkah, it means that these poles have to be wide enough that you'd be able to carve out diomdin, these L shapes that would have one tefach in each direction. So let's read that again. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, no, it's arba kundisin ba'aretz. If you take 4 poles and you stick them into the ground, v'sikei chalgabon, and you put schach on top of the 4 poles. Rabbi Yaakov Omer says, Rabbi Yaakov wrote, kol she'ilu yechakaku v'yechalku, as long as you can square off these poles and then cut out L shapes, v'yishbain tefach lechan v'tefach lechan, and you'll have one tefach on each side, each direction of the L. Nidonin mishum diomed, we can treat each pole as a diomed. Ve'imlav ein nidonin mishum diomed. But if they're not wide enough to be able to do that, then we don't treat them as a diomed, and then it would not be a kosher sukkah. So Rabbi Yaakov Omer, that Rabbi Yaakov would say diomdi sukkah tefach, that when it comes to the diomdin, these L-shaped walls of a sukkah, they just have to be a tefach, and that's enough. Whereas the Chacham say, no, diomdin do not work when it comes to a sukkah. You have to have at least 2 proper walls, and then the third wall can at least just be a tefach, and that's enough. But diomdin, these sort of like L-shaped, interesting fake walls, imaginary walls, don't work. You have to have 2 proper walls that are at least 7 tefachim by 7 tefachim, and then the third wall can be a tefach. That is what you need for a sukkah. Chevre, that was Daf Daled of Masechta Sukkah. Where do I even get started here in trying to break it down? I mean, basically we're talking about a sukkah that is too tall, that's more than 20 amas, and you're trying to sort of minimize it in all sorts of different ways, whether it's with cushions, whether with straw, whether with dirt, right? The main thing in those cases is, are you going to be removing these items? If it's something that you're going to remove, even if it's something that you personally won't remove, but everybody else would remove, so then betela dato eitzel kol adam, we say something like straw that you might want to use for firewood, for food, for your animals, whatever it might be. So you have to davka say, I'm leaving it there. We saw machlokas between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yossi about what if you leave the straw there, but you don't necessarily intend to be moving it. Rabbi Yossi would say, okay, it's considered like it's batal. The Chachamim say, no, it's not. We talked about dofen akuma, right? Let's say you have a sukkah that's taller than 20 amas, and then you build a platform in it. Right? So, the first way to do it was, we said, if you build a platform along the far wall and it goes from one side to the other side, as long as the platform has the minimum size of a sukkah of it, so then we say that actually the entire sukkah is good, because the platform, of course, is less than 20 amas from the top to the schach, and therefore that is a kosher sukkah, and then the rest of the sukkah actually becomes the psala yotze min sukkah, right? Just like extend, stuff that's overhanging the side of the sukkah, and that you can also use. But if you build the platform on like the side wall, so then now it's only touching 2 walls, and you needed to have a third wall. So then, as long as the space between the platform and the side and the other wall is less than 4 amas, we could say dofen akuma, that the far wall bends over to touch the platform, and then we say that is kosher. We talked about if you have a sukkah that is less than 10 tefachim tall, and then you sort of dig it out. So in this case, we can't say dofen akuma, because these walls that are less than 10 tefachim aren't actually considered walls, and therefore you can't say dofen akuma. But as long as the dugout space is less than 3 tefachim from the walls, we could say lavud, and therefore that would be, and in that case it would be considered 10 tefachim tall. But if it's more than 3 tefachim between the dugout area and the walls, we cannot say lavud, in which case you don't have a kosher sukkah. We discussed when you take poles and you put them on top of the, and you put schach on top. We saw machlokas between Rav Huna and Rav Nachman. Rav Huna says that the machlokas is davka on the side of a roof. The Rabbi Yaakov says we could say good asik, that the walls of the house extend up, and the Chacham said you cannot say good asik, but in the middle of the roof, everyone would say it's possible. But then and Rav Nachman says no, the machlokas is in the middle of the roof. But then we brought a proof from a brisa that Rabbi Yaakov would say that no, even just if you take 4 poles and you put schach on top, that could be a kosher sukkah. But then we pointed out that would have to be that the poles are wide enough that you'd be able to cut out L shapes that have a tefach in each side. Then we could consider them to be diomdin, and that diomdin work when it comes to sukkah. But the chacham disagree and say no, diomdin don't work by a sukkah. Rather, you have to have at least 2 proper walls, and then a third wall that's at least a tefach. That was the Daled of Masechta Sukkah, a very Eruvini kind of daf. I hope it brings back good memories, at least for the short term. Have a great day. Cheers.